Preaching with the stars. Okay, I'll just explain to everybody that's not here where we are. I'm in San Luis Mission Park in Tallahassee, Florida. Nice people here. So there's a lake, and then there are several number of humans. There you go. So, okay, now they have to look at me again. It's actually probably the lake's a little prettier. Can you put the? Oh, how do I? Can I fasten this on there?
However, it basically goes up.
Can you? Is there a way to get it to fit in there?
Yeah, should we pull this out?
Oh, that's how you do it. Perfect. That's great. Is there a tightener? Here. Is that maybe not?
Let it go. I think yeah, we can do it.
No, I think the ball's right there.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be. I'll work with it. See what I can do with it.
In the meantime, this is kind of narcissistic, right? Looking at myself like this, but it fits in with the age we live in. So, I guess to start out, does anyone have any questions about anything? Any of this? Does any of you know anything about what we're doing? Yeah, go ahead.
This is a question actually Noah asked. Do you want to answer? I can read it off.
Sure.
The idea of God's having a form and at the same time, you know, as Krishna describes in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, being the letter A among letters and the ocean among bodies of water. So how do you reconcile God's Krishna?
Yeah. Did you read that section? No, in my Gita, the Gita guide. Yeah, I actually have a whole section on that. So I am prepared. Yeah, why don't you do that somewhere else so it's not like right in front of me? It's ready. It's ready? Anyway, here's the explanation. Those verses where Krishna... Oh, back to myself. Those verses where Krishna explains, like, for example, of bodies of water, I'm the sea, or of mountains, I'm the Himalayan mountains. Those verses principally, though not exclusively, appear in chapters 7 and 11. No relation to the fast food chain, or the convenience stores. And actually, it's a Krishna Kripa. It's kind of hard to speak when you're talking there and doing all that stuff. It's ready? Okay, try take 2. Let's see if it works now. Okay, victory. So, now Krishna whenever he has all these verses where he identifies with different extraordinary or powerful features of the material world, he frames those verses with statements. Framing meaning, like, before he launches into that, he says, what I'm about to do is to describe my vibhutis. That's the Sanskrit word vibhuti. And then when he finishes, he says, what I just told you was my vibhutis. He does that in chapter 7 and, 7 and 10. So even less confusion with the convenience store chain. So to understand what Krishna is doing, you have to understand the Sanskrit word vibhuti, which I'll explain. Sanskrit, by the way, is cognate with, that means linguistically related to English. So the word V is, well, I won't go into all the technical grammar of it, but for example, in Italian, anyone here know Italian? No. So in Italian, the way they say, like, get out of here, is they say via, via. And so that via, which we also have, it's kind of like going away, and so that's the V in vibhuti. So in Sanskrit, you can have the sense of separation from something. But also, you can have the sense of categorizing, where you kind of, things go into their own categories. and or it can have the sense of expansion, because when you go away, it can not just be because someone doesn't want you there. It can also be because you're moving, you're expanding, you're growing from an initial point. And so in this, and B, the word vibhuti is, by the way, it comes from a Sanskrit root from which you get the English word be, like to be. And so it means existence. So vibhuti literally means, in this case, expansive existence, existence that expands. So that's the nature of God. We sometimes say the glory of God, or people used to say that. So, so when Krishna talks about his vibhutis, he's talking about the ways in which he expands himself into his own creation. For example, let's say you paint a picture. So there's a sense in which you are present in the painting. If you study art, or if you study literature, then if you know something about the life of the artist or the author, that's sort of a key into the work. Like among, let's say, like Western novels, my favorite author, as everyone knows, is Jane Austen, who I consider to be a real genius. I mean, everyone considers her to be a real genius. So, if you know something about her life, if you know something about the historical period in which she lived, then that gives you a clue as to why she writes things in a certain way. And so, in the case of Krishna, if you know something about the Creator, it helps, it gives you some insight into the creation, and vice versa. For example, when Europe was coming out of the dark ages of sort of brutal religious fanaticism, only to move later in the Renaissance into another type of brutal religious fanaticism in the form of the wars between the Catholics and Protestants. It always just seems to be something they were good at, brutal religious fanaticism. But in any case, when they were coming out of that, they used to say, rather than in the Dark Ages, they said the only book that gives reliable information is the Bible. If it's not in the Bible, we don't know if it's true or not. And that was kind of nice try. So then they started to say, well, there's actually God gave us two books. And the Bible, but also the book of nature, as they called it. The book of nature. The idea being that if God created the world, then you should find somehow his or her, or their, won't get into that gender issues, but you should somehow find God's signature in nature. So let's say they discover a painting and someone says, this is a lost Rembrandt. They have experts, art historians, who will study it and ultimately decide, whether the picture is worth millions of dollars or maybe $75. And that, because the assumption is that Rembrandt has certain characteristic, signature things he does in his paintings. And so if this is really Rembrandt, we're going to find those things in the paintings. And so that's the idea. So, or just for example, take Jane Austen's novels. She was, before she passed away, at the age of 41, in Winchester, she was working on a 7th novel, which is called Sanditon. And she didn't finish it, so a lot of people have tried to finish it for her. Or they've tried to write sequels, like Pride and Prejudice. Okay, here's a sequel. This is what happens after Lizzie marries Darcy, and this is their married life. And usually those books are absolutely awful, in my view. I mean, they're just awful. And I'm not saying it's illegal to write them, but maybe something just below that. So the idea is, if you really know an author, you can tell something. So the assumption was in the Renaissance that if God creates the world, then inevitably, and in Sanskrit actually they have the same doctrine in Buddhism and other philosophies, called Satkaryavad, which means that an effect, that if something causes something else, then the cause is somehow present in the effect. Like, to give an example, let's say there's a fender bender in the road. And so, they say, don't move the cars, and then all the insurance people come out, and they take pictures, and they measure the skid marks, and they see the angle of impact, etc. And then from that, they try to figure out, for legal purposes, who caused the accident, what happened. For example, it's saying a 25 mile per hour zone. If the car was going 45 miles per hour, it would cause a certain type of impact, which you couldn't cause at 25, etc., etc. Simple stuff. So this same principle of logic that causes are still present in their effects may also apply. And also we use that, by the way, like in history. You start with an effect, like let's say the Civil War. Why was there a Civil War? You start with the effect and try to reason back to the causes. So analysis always goes, it reverses the direction of time. Analysis goes from something that already happened and you try to reason back to the cause. So why not do that with God? So if God caused the world, if God created the world, then somehow we should be able to discover evidence of that within the effect, namely the universe. And so that was the idea, and there's some truth to that. It may not take you all the way, but you can learn a lot. By the way, one last thing. I don't want to bore you with all this academic stuff, but I'm going to indulge myself in one more point. And that is that during the ancient world, the ancient Greco-Roman world, there was a very popular movement called Stoicism. And the Stoics, anyway, whatever else they did, they had this very interesting idea about what they called the logos. That's why we get the word. That's where we get the word logic. That's why they put ology after all the disciplines like geology, biology. Don't know much about. Anyway, so because logos means like logic or reasonable explanation of something. The only one the academic world lost, and they're really unhappy about this, astrology. They lost the astrology word. So they had to settle for astronomy. They're very unhappy about that. But anyway, so the idea behind this logos was that God is not just someone that needs all these 12-step programs like for jealousy management and anger management, but to the contrary, God is actually a completely rational being. God is actually a supremely, infinitely rational being. He's reasonable, infinitely reasonable. And therefore, and this infinite reason, this infinite rationality of God, they call the logos. And because God creates the world, therefore the world has logic to it. If the world was not logical, you couldn't have science. You couldn't do science if every event happened not due to the laws of nature, because there are no laws of nature. What if we lived in just some completely crazy world where, let's say you throw up an apple and it falls to the earth, and the next time you throw up the apple, it goes up or it goes sideways, and there's no reason for that. It's just there are no rules. Some people might find that sort of thrilling, but I think it's just kind of insanity. Because, well, basically, you couldn't think, you couldn't reason. You would have no idea if you eat food whether it will nourish you or kill you. You couldn't do anything. The world would be completely insane. So the idea is that, in fact, science, you may be interested to know, although in the 20th century, science sort of, and late 19th century, kind of declared war on religion. Religion's the enemy. But actually, religious people invented science. They don't always tell you that because they're not always scrupulous. But anyway, I won't go into all the historical reasons why American universities tend to be a little loopy and they don't know about history. But they, why did religious people invent science? Because science is based on an assumption that came from religion, namely that a rational being creates the world and therefore the world is lawful. It follows predictable or discernible, discoverable rules and principles. And so therefore, whoops. I see this is not windproof. That was a wind, by the way. Anyway, I'll just hold it. so that was the idea. All the first great astronomers, even Galileo was actually believed in God and thought that all these people. So, anyway, and they believed the world was real, by the way. It's not obvious, or no, it is obvious, but it's not.
If you want it, it'll work. You just got to.
I become very possessive now. I don't know if I want to let go of it. So, okay.
One of your fans wants to know if you can hear this online as it's happening.
If what?
One of your fans wants to know if you can see this online as it's speaking.
If I can do what online?
Yes, what's the link?
Oh, it's my Facebook thing. Actually, I never go on Facebook, but I have one. I just hit the Facebook button when I have to do a class.
Okay. Thank you.
So, fan. I never think of myself as having fans. I mean, people listen to the classes, but
It's Daru, by the way.
Oh, Daru. So, anyway, so let's get back to the word vibhuti. You're not going to listen to it now, will you? Send the link. At my age, I can't do things like send links. So, now let's go back. You were Noah. Yeah, so your question, get back to your question. In case you thought that at my age I'm no longer lucid and can't remember what I was saying 15 minutes ago. But, so, in the word vibhuti, the idea is that God can expand his or her existence so that when you see great things in the world, there's an author behind it. Like this lake. I mean, lakes are nice. Ponds or lakes. I mean, it's nice to be by a lake. And it's beautiful. The scene is beautiful. So the idea is there's an artist behind it. So that's what Krishna is saying. He's not saying, when he says, I am these things, again, he's framed all these statements several times by saying, I am these things. Like, for example, let's say someone paints a picture or writes a novel. And you could say, wow, this is... People, we even talk that way. We say, yeah, I saw this beautiful Rembrandt. I mean, technically, Rembrandt is dead. So when you say, I saw a great Rembrandt, or I read I'm reading Jane Austen. I mean, you're not literally reading the human being Jane Austen. You're reading a book that Jane Austen wrote. And that's the way that Krishna is using language here. By describing himself, these are things that I've created. So. Thank you. Any other question?
Okay, what makes the Bhagavad-Gita so special? As far as like all these literatures.
Okay. Is there any water here? Oh, there is water. You see that? It actually wasn't there until I said this. Tell your children, and they will tell their children that you saw it. Anyway, so, okay, what makes Bhagavad Gita special? First of all, I like it. Well, that's not the main thing. It's the only major scripture in all the world religions, major world religions, that is claimed to have been spoken by God. If you just go down your list, you look at Judaism. In Judaism, God does speak, but especially in the older portions, scholars of the Old Testament, they've noticed that because the Old Testament is kind of like, how should I put it, the running history of the Jewish people. So that certain parts were written very long time ago, thousands of years ago, and they just kept adding books to it. In fact, they even had discussions, roughly, I don't know, maybe a little less than 2,000 years ago about what the canon should be, because they have all these books. They were very literate people, and they really treasured their sacred literature. And so some books didn't make the cut. Like, it was kind of like the tryout, for the Old Testament. And so they kept some books and didn't have other books. And so it's really this, it's an amazing work. There's practically nothing like it, I think, where you have this running history that goes for thousands of years. And so naturally written by different authors. And if you look at Judaism, it's easy to discern that it went through different self-understanding. So that, to give one example, which is relevant here to your question, in the early period of the Old Testament, let's say Adam and Eve, and then to Noah, down to Noah, and then down to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you study the relationship of people, faithful people, to God, it's very intimate. They talk to each other. One example I give, because I'm too lazy to think of another example, but the second patriarch is Isaac, Abraham, Isaac. So his wife is Rebecca. And she was having a difficult pregnancy. And she was unhappy, it's kind of suffering, it was painful pregnancy. So she just goes to God, the way you go to your father and say, can't you do something about this? So she just goes to complain, or in the Garden of Eden. So there's this intimate relationship. People talk to God. God gives direct orders to people, like telling Abraham to sacrifice his son as a test, and so on. So people directly talk to God. This period ends. This historical period ends. And especially after the well, no, not after the flood, but so when it ends, and then you get a new period where people don't speak directly to God, and so you get a new phenomenon which is called prophets. The Old Testament prophets. And the prophets are people who kind of channel God. And you don't even have, it's not like the prophets, like, let's say Isaiah goes out into the forest and God comes and says, we need to talk. I'm not happy with the way things are going. It's not even that. It's just prophets appear. Isaiah, Jeremiah, all these prophets, and they go out in public and they tell the people God is not at all happy with the way things are going, and you need to knock it off or God's going to knock you out. Basically, that's the basic prophetic message. And so God's communication with his people becomes less direct. It's through prophets, and even the prophets, they're sort of, I guess they're inspired. They feel that God is inspiring them to say certain things. And then you get into later Judaism, and especially around the time of Jesus, and especially this accelerated with the destruction of the Second Temple around 70, 71 AD. And that is, you get the rabbinical period, where you don't really, people don't just hang out with God anymore like they used to, and they don't even, there's not even prophets who claim that God is inspiring me to tell you this. You just get rabbis who comment on the Talmud, on these ancient texts, and they debate and they discuss different interpretations. So, and there's other differences also. I'm just giving you one example. So, therefore, what I'm saying is, in modern Judaism, almost in all the forms of modern Judaism, whether it's Orthodox or conservative, or they have, different things, none of them claim that, really, that this book is directly spoken by God. Or if you do have, like you have Moses speaking the laws, like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but again, is Moses, or people believing that God somehow inspired Moses to say certain things. But even then, a lot of it's not so much philosophy. It's like how to treat your camel, or if your neighbor steals one of your chickens, what do you do? Or what foods can you eat? Kosher laws. But in terms of, and then in Christianity, of course, you have the Son of God speaking. You have the prophet in Islam and Buddhism. They're kind of, very ambivalent about God. Although Buddhism is another story. Buddhism is, the Buddhism that became a world religion is not the one-hand clapping stuff, or just the mindfulness. That's the whole other story, what actual Buddhism was historically. But in any case, in Bhagavad-Gita, you have Krishna claiming to be God and just directly speaking philosophy, or you could say theology, combination of philosophy and theology. And there's nothing else like that. There's nothing else. We have a tradition. In fact, the word Bhagavad means the Lord. So the song of the Lord. And there's no one else even really claims that. That God, I won't get into the Trinity thing because that's oof. But anyway, but that's a whole other story. I better not get started. How Jesus got upgraded as the pagans took over his movement, by the way. It started out, if you look at the New Testament, all the people that knew Jesus, lived with Jesus, learned from Jesus personally, they were all Jewish. And Jesus is known as Rabbi. Then after that, there was a radical demographic shift because of the efforts of Paul and what was going on in Jerusalem. And what had been a Jewish movement and was known to the Romans as a Jewish movement became a total pagan movement, became paganized. The philosophy was changed, the rituals, everything. That's a whole other story. By that demographic shift. But in any case, having the Supreme Lord, the Father, the Mother, come down to this world and personally just teach systematic philosophy, no one else claims that. Another claim which is absolutely unique is that God, the Father, the Mother, etc., actually lived in this world a full lifetime. Not just as a minister, but actually lived a full lifetime, sort of inserted himself in human history, participated in human history, and gave many, many philosophical teachings, not only in the Bhagavad-Gita, but also in other texts, like the Bhagavad and so on. So the claim that's being made is unique about Krishna. And the book kind of lives up to its press. You say, okay, this is the book that God spoke, but I read it and I was kind of underwhelmed. Or, it's nice, but is that the best God could do? Actually, if you read the Bhagavad-Gita carefully, it is a most amazing book. So in about approximately 700 verses, you get this. And that's why it became the most powerful, most important book in what was later called, much later, thousands of years later, Hinduism, which is not really a historical term. But it is, just to give an example, India, I think, as I claimed in a course I taught on this, actually, at the University of Florida in Gainesville. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, that it was the University of Florida. I never bought, actually, a gator hat. So, that India is the best place in the world to study the free exchange, and you could even say competition between religions. For these reasons. Number one, India always had freedom of religion. Europe had freedom of religion until fanatical Middle Eastern religions became prominent there. But before that time, if you look at the pagan period, there was actually freedom of religion in Europe. In fact, they had a name for it. It was known as the Interpretatio Graeca, or Romana, which means that they believed that there is one ultimate reality, one supreme God, or different divine beings, and different cultures just use different names, or maybe tell different stories, but it's actually all the same God. And they believed that. Alexander the Great believed that. They were actually religious, they believed in religious syncretism, that there's one ultimate truth, people approach in different ways, so we don't need to kill each other about this. We can talk about it, maybe debate. So that was Europe. And then you get these fanatical Middle Eastern traditions that came. This is the only way. If you don't believe in our God, then you're worshiping the devil. All kinds of really open-minded things like that. And since you're worshiping the devil, the only logical thing to do is to kill you in the most painful way that a human mind can devise, as a lesson to other people. So this kind of stuff, anyway, kind of speaks for itself. So in India also, in the oldest Indian texts, which is the Rig Veda, no one knows really how old it is. Some people pretend that they don't really know. There's no real evidence. So it said there that the ultimate truth is one, but different people invoke it with different names in different ways, but there's one truth. So here's India, South Asia really, because it includes modern Pakistan and Bangladesh and other areas, even parts of modern Afghanistan. So you have this large civilization that believes in the freedom of religion. They've always believed that. Second, India, and you may find this odd as one of the reasons, but it is relevant, it has by far the best natural system, natural irrigation system in the world. Just put into your browser rivers of India, and you will see that they have a lot of fertile land. They have the best natural river system in the world. There's water everywhere. It has all different climates, from rainforests to jungles to deserts, mountains. You can live at any altitude you want in India because it goes up to, the highest mountains in the world, foothills. You can live, so they have every conceivable climate and a huge amount of fertile land. India had all kinds of precious stones. And of course, in an agrarian, before the Industrial Revolution, basically everyone had an agrarian economy. And so if you have the best situation in the world, sunshine, water, fertile land, the best situation in the world to produce food, you're rich. And they had all kinds of other precious things, and they were very intelligent. So, and the people of India, last thing, they were always spiritually inclined. I mean, not everybody, but there were always a lot of people in South Asia that were seriously interested in spirituality and religion. So when you have interest, and you have a huge number of people, because the land can support a large population, people are intelligent, and they believe in freedom of religion, what do you get? You get the most dynamic intercourse between different views. For example, just to give an example, in Europe, when Martin Luther came up with his Protestant idea, it basically unleashed about 100 to 150 years of incredibly violent, cruel, sickening warfare. And he just said, here's another way to be a Christian. I mean, in Europe at that time, if you would have come up with, say, like, hey, everybody, maybe we should be Buddhists, or maybe we should be Hindus. In Europe, they couldn't have killed you fast enough. Well, actually, they could, because they wouldn't kill you fast, because that would be too merciful. They would kill you very slowly. I mean, if just because you thought, here's a better way to be Christian, 150 years of just incredible cruelty and murder and torture. Imagine another religious idea. It's not even Christian. I mean, it's unimaginable. And yet in India, about 2,500 years ago, that you found the rise of Buddhism, which said that all the sacred books of the, we'll say Hindus for now, that wasn't really their name, but all the sacred books of Hinduism are false. Oh my God! I can't even imagine what would have happened in Europe. It's inconceivable. But in India, people said, well, that's interesting, but let's debate. So they had debates. People didn't kill each other, they just had debates. And they tried, everyone tried to convince other people of what they thought was true. So you have this incredible, plus India is the only major country that was, to a large extent vegetarian. They had animal rights. So it's very rich, very advanced, and this is not just, it's not just that I'm like a PR guy for Indian religion. We actually have a book called Indica, a Greek book about India, written by a Greek ambassador to India about 2,400 years ago, in which he says all these things. So anyway, so the Gita was the big winner. Here you have this country with a large population, intelligent people, inclined towards spirituality, philosophical, logical, and they have the freedom to debate. And after centuries of this, who's the big winner? Bhagavad-Gita. Not because, the Gita people killed the other people, but because it just convinced a whole civilization that this is the most powerful, most consistent, coherent approach to God or spirituality. And so my conviction is, as a Gita thumper, my conviction is that in an open marketplace of ideas, which America is, if I don't know how many people still traffic in things like ideas, but if we present Krishna appropriately, properly, intelligently, that the same thing will happen as happened in other great civilizations, because it is really that good. So that's a deluxe answer to your question. Anything else?
I have 2 questions.
Yes. Oh, okay. We got a Sunday special going on here. I'm going to throw in that second question for the same price.
My first question is like, how do we get inspired to read Bhagavad-Gita or Bhagavatam regularly? How do we get inspired? I know like it's a wonderful information, like a lot of
Yes.
about, but at least mine are too. Considering myself, I'm like very lazy and very very inconsistent in doing things. So how do I get inspired to read this wonderful literature?
For someone who's really lazy and inconsistent, you're dressed pretty well. So you must be able to do something in life. I would say that, yeah, there are a lot of things we would like to do, but I mean, laziness. You get to a certain age where you just don't want trouble. You just want to have a peaceful, stable life. That was unimaginable to me when I was younger, but you do get to that age. And so it's determination, right? First of all, I don't think you're quite as lazy as you claim to be.
Lazy in the sense like when I start reading these scriptures or even a material book, I fall asleep.
Well, at least you found some practical use for your... Didn't completely waste your money buying these books. Theology is not like what everybody wants to read nowadays. Like if you put out a movie and say, technical Vaishnava theology, it's going to have a very short run at the theater. So, have you read the Gita I wrote? Please try. I'm trying to... Prabhupada gave me a direct order, and he said, read my books and explain them in your own language. I am writing books which are meant for a Western audience. It doesn't mean they're better than Prabhupada's books. To the contrary, he's far above me spiritually. But I do kind of, Western culture is my first cultural language. And so I'm trying to present it in a way that people can... So just read that, and if you're still falling asleep, sue me. Or we can talk about it, but yeah, try to read it. I think if you read it, you'll find that you may understand it, because you're in the West. You probably think Western if you have a job. Hare Krishna.
My second question.
Oh, yes. Yeah, double dipping.
We are in the Shastra, we have read like everything, the entire world was called as like Bharat.
Yeah, that we've heard that the whole world was Bharata. That was in India, in South Asia, let us say, because it was beyond the modern borders of India. Yeah, the whole world was called Bharata. Now, but what, you see, there's a whole issue. When we read ancient place names, in other words, if you read very old books and they give geographic names for things, what did those names refer to? To give an example, if you read an old book in Spanish and it talks about Paraguay, Paraguay is a very big country. But then Brazil and Argentina decided they wanted to cut down Paraguay, so they ganged up and they declared war. Now Paraguay is a very little country, but it used to be a very big country. So what names refer to? For example, in our literature, there is no statement I'm aware of people crossing the ocean. So what we find is we find traces of this ancient civilization in what is in this huge landmass, which is Africa, Asia, and Europe are actually one big landmass. Oops, don't let this fall down. Again, getting a lot of hearts, that's nice. Someone likes what I'm saying. So, we don't have references to people going, let's say, to the Western Hemisphere, or Australia, or New Zealand, and so on. So we know that people from this civilization went, for example, all over Europe. The Ire in Ireland, the old ancient Celtic word, the Ire in Ireland is actually related to the word Arya. Arya. And there's another word, what's that word? Iran. So the word Iran, because we know that in the ancient Persian civilization they spoke a dialect of Vedic Sanskrit. And so that's Iran, Ireland. That's all connected to the Vedic civilization. So we know they found seals of Pashupati, Lord Shiva sitting with the animals, sitting in a yoga position. They found those seals, which come from the Harappan, perhaps, civilization. They found those in Denmark. Yeah, in Denmark. Yeah, and also because the Germanic peoples, either the Scandinavian people or the Germanic peoples, we know all their languages are intimately connected to Sanskrit. And, for example, they found Viking or Nordic graveyards outside Beijing. So the ancient world was very much connected, much more than we imagine. But it tends to be in that one great landmass, which is Africa, Asia, and Europe. You know, we call them different continents, but actually, that's why they had to build the Suez Canal, right? Because Africa is actually connected to Asia. Otherwise, they wouldn't need a canal. So the Western Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, we just don't have evidence that people went there. And again, when they talk, for example, when they talk about going to the north, how far north? If you go north in India, you come to the Himalayan mountains. If you somehow get through some very high mountain passes, like today it's Peshawar, what do they call the Khyber Pass, or on the eastern side other passes, then you come to Central Asia. And if you go Central Asia, of course, then you go to the northwest, you come to Russia, then you come to Europe, and so on. Or there's other ways. For example, we know that in the Harappan civilization, which is basically now northwest India and Pakistan, that they had active trade with the Persian Gulf. And of course, the Persian Gulf, through the Silk Road, had active trade with Europe. So the ancient world was very much connected. As far as, and there's all kinds of other evidence, but I won't go on. As far as, but there are places, Western Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, we don't know.
What was your question though?
Yeah. So like all the fastings that we read in Bhagavad,
Yes.
or everything is like only within this current India.
No, not India. South, for example, Gandhari came from Gandhara, which is, then later the Greeks called it Bactria, because when Alexander basically conquered the Persian Empire, that included Bactria, which is now in Afghanistan, and that was where Gandhari came from. So we know that at least from Afghanistan to Bangladesh and farther north, that was the immediate area of the Mahabharata.
I had one small question.
Yes.
What is your favorite chapter in the Gita?
My favorite chapter? I do not have a favorite chapter, color, food, or anything. The only thing I have a favorite of is novelist Jane Austen, but and Krishna is my favorite person. But I like all the chapters; they're all interesting. If you sit down to a feast, you know, you don't have to pick a favorite preparation; you just have to overeat. Yes. Orange.
Orange, the color orange. And I noticed when we first started speaking, we were all sitting here, and I had my eyes closed so that I could just concentrate on the word. And I got the biggest burst of
Krishna Kripa, are you? Yes.
They stayed there for a really long time. So I finally opened my eyes and slowly the green came back. And so I thought that orange was associated with
That's interesting. I've never really heard like a chromatic correspondence with.
She said it's associated with religion, right?
Well, orange, I'll tell you about the saffron thing. In ancient India and other places, the sages didn't yet have cars or even golf carts. And so they used to walk. And it rains and it gets muddy. And so they picked sort of an earth tone because I guess it, didn't, like if you're wearing white clothes and a big bunch of mud splatters on you, it's
eventually the red was going to be the color of green.
so they wore these earth tones, and so it became saffron, and then became sort of a tradition that renounced people wear the saffron color. It's a nice color, but as far as, I think if you look at the way Krishna made the world, it's got so many beautiful colors. So I would take the way the world is to be the artist's choice. In fact, it's the combination. Like, for example, we have these green plants and then the water, which is a very interesting color. I don't know how. I mean, can anyone suggest a word for the color of the lake is right now to us?
Brackish.
What?
Brackish.
Well, brackish means kind of like dirty. Maybe it's brackish, but it's kind of silver. It's got different. It's just an amazing color. I mean, I guess an artist might be able to put a name on it, but. And so and then we have the blue sky and we have the white clouds, and so I think it, to cite the old British proverb, variety is the mother of enjoyment. So I'm kind of lots of colors person.
Cool. I wanted to share something if that's okay with you. So like, I have this instrument here, and in Australia they consider this instrument like to be their connection with God. It's like the didgeridoo. So once you play it for like a couple minutes, just for you guys, because it's really far. I just started playing this not too long ago, and like they'll get in a tribe and they'll get like a fire going, and then basically we'll all just.
Okay, maybe we'll just wrap this up because I actually have to go to another program in Gainesville. So before you begin, you're welcome to do that, but maybe we'll just wrap this up. Yes. Yeah.
It seems to me the essence of religion is like to bring all human beings, all living entities together on the platform of service to the Lord. But we see there's all these sectarian issues that sort of like overshadow the real purpose. Do you have any insight into
First of all, I would say America's making progress. In the sense that I saw a poll they took where 2/3 of Christians, of all the different kinds of Christians, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, said they believe that people can go to heaven in other traditions. So I think in fact, the Southern Baptist Convention, I read, is losing members because the younger generations don't want to be fanatical. So I think there are various signs, and of course then there's the unchurched group that's growing so much, but I think nowadays in America there still are some fanatics that don't understand that God appears to different people in different ways. Bless you. But I think there's a lot of people, probably majority, that are not fanatical and that are respectful towards other traditions. That's not true in all parts of the world, but I think in America it's not too bad. What time is it, by the way?
It's 1:25. Are you hungry? Yeah, we do have
A little
some.
bit.
We made some food.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I got an idea. Why don't maybe we'll end the philosophical portion of our program here, and we'll eat. And while people are eating, you could become, be like, yeah. Like in these really good restaurants, they have live musicians. Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks for coming. And all you people out there, let's see, can I get this out? Yeah. Thank you all for watching, and see you guys later.